Welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I feel like I haven't started in a while. I don't know why. That's not true. But I'm Damien.
Well, you took 2 weeks in a row.
I did.
Yeah.
I just don't remember saying that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I'm Damien, everybody.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society and whatever tangent happens to come to us.
Absolutely. This is why we shouldn't record late. We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. Aaron, you're up this week.
Oh, thank you so much.
What are you bringing to the table today?
So generous.
Yes.
I appreciate you for giving me the time.
Yes, you're welcome.
I am bringing a short history of U.S. police and tear gas, which is a zine from Mariame Kaba and Interrupting Criminalization.
Yes.
Mariame describes it as, quote, the sixth zine in my archival activations series. In it, I share some historical background about the U.S. police and their use of tear gas, along with the archival photos and documents from my collection. I hope that more people will come to oppose its use and support efforts to ban it.
Yes.
Which helped. It worked for me.
Absolutely.
It worked for me.
Yes.
And the photos are really great, and there's so much in it, and so much history is really infuriating because it points out how easy it seems to be to corrupt the governmental processes here in the United States.
Yeah.
And Mariame also opens up the zine by saying, quote, most of the public barely bats an eye at the indiscriminate use of a chemical weapon. Society has normalized it. In the United States, tear gas is considered a standard police weapon used to disperse and repress crowds. It is generally discussed and marketed as a non-lethal and humane policing tool. However, the truth is that tear gas is both traumatizing and dangerous and has been used by cops to intensify rather than prevent violence.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the zine, she highlights a few examples of how tear gas has intensified that violence intention to back up that point that she makes there.
Yes, she does.
But that's probably enough for an introduction because there's more stuff to talk about. So where do you want to start?
Yeah, no, I agree. This was an incredible zine and really thoughtful analysis by the great Mariame Kaba. It's always amazing to get to learn from her. And, I think I mentioned this when you introed this piece last week, but I hadn't really thought much at all or learned much at all about the history of the use of tear gas in the U.S. and actually also around the globe. So I was really excited to dig into this, and I was captivated right away by this zine because she used her personal experiences engaging in protests and social movements as sort of a through line for sharing and analyzing this history and use of tear gas and the intended impact of it and why it's so atrocious and dangerous. And I just thought it was a really compelling way to sort of set up and structure this zine.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this, but one of the things that really stood out to me were the incredible archival photographs in it. They were, I think, one of the most compelling parts of this zine to me. So there's lots of pictures in it. I'm probably not going to do this justice, but there are pictures in protests from demonstrations in cities all across the world, including places like Atlanta, Georgia in 1965 and 66, Albuquerque, New Mexico in 71, Lima, Peru in 61, Everett, Massachusetts in 39, Buenos Aires in 1963, Jackson, Mississippi, also in 63, right in our backyard in D.C. in both 1969 and 1970. And then there's even archival photographs from college campuses in places like Louisiana, California, Wisconsin, North Carolina, all throughout the 60s and 70s. And so, and that's just a few of them. And so I think what stood out to me about those photographs was just the violence and the barbarity and the depravity and the real inhumaneness of what tear gas has done and what it's capable of and the pain that it inflicts. And you see that in the horror of the people in those photos and how they're running and how they're sheltering and how they're crouching and how they're trying to take care of one another. And it just shocks me that our collective society has allowed this kind of inhumane treatment to continue to be used by police forces across the country and around the globe, even to this day, which, is obviously, as you said, the point of the zine. But right, when you see it in those pictures, right, you see the horror in those pictures. It's like, why haven't we, stood up to say, like, no more of this. No more of all of it, but no more specifically of this.
Yeah, and I think you listed off a bunch of examples there of photos and how the scenes are really upsetting. And we know that those are just a few examples.
Yeah.
There's a lot more. And so going back to her quote, the indiscriminate use of tear gas is really on display there, because this is just a small sample size of photographs that she has in her archives.
Absolutely.
And so we talk about, why is this still acceptable? There's this guy.
Yeah.
General Amos Fries. I think it's Fries. It might be Fries. I'm going to call him Fries.
Yeah, I like it.
Fries. So he wanted to sell tear gas, and he did.
Yeah.
He and his arms-dealing buddies, quote, ignored veteran testimony about the horrors of gas warfare, successfully presenting tear gas as distinct from non-lethal gases and encouraging its deployment against unarmed civilians, which, of course, he did.
Yeah.
It's marketed as a tool to combat crime, riot, and revolution alongside machine guns and bulletproof vests and some more archival. It's an image of a advertisement in a magazine, I guess, or a newspaper. And so Fries went on, and eventually there were tear gas incidents that were used in response to, as you mentioned, an uprising in D.C.
Yep.
And in that, 2 newborns were killed as a result of inhaling tear gas.
Yep.
So non-lethal, right?
Sure.
But there are deaths. And then Mariame goes on to say that, quote, incidents like this prompted Senate investigations, but tear gas advocates and manufacturers had too many military and commercial connections to be held accountable or regulated. Because, of course,
Right.
that's how our government actually works. It doesn't matter what the people want, as long as it's good for business or the military-industrial complex or sitting senators' pocketbooks.
There it is.
And we just need to all sit down and shut up. This is a different version of Congress people being able to buy and sell stocks based on insider information that they get in committee meetings. And it's despicable, and just one small piece of the despicable machinations of the United States.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a great tie-in to what I talked about there. And the larger connection to the military industrial complex, I think, is key there. And the fact that, this in particular, our government is really all about funding the military industrial complex full hog. And this is a piece of it. You mentioned this, and she uses this word, and it I don't know why it stuck with me, but one of the things that stood out to me in these stories that she shared was the indiscriminate use of tear gas by police in these protests and demonstrations and situations. And so you said she's shared some stories. I wanted to share one of them. She shared from July 2015, when she was taking part in a Movement for Black Lives conference in Cleveland. And she described what happened when her group was waiting for buses to take them back home to Chicago. And the group then stumbled upon a group of people demanding that police release this young black boy who was handcuffed on the street. And so she says, quote, by the time I arrived, the boy was sitting inside a bus shelter surrounded by cops and over 24 black people who had attended the Movement for Black Lives convening. One person, a comrade, was on her phone reaching out to the boy's mother. I realized no one was going to leave until she arrived on the scene. The police escalated the standoff when they tried to move the boy towards one of the police cars parked in the street. The growing crowd followed, and some people shouted at the cops to release the boy. Meanwhile, more black people were making their way to the scene. The police further escalated the confrontation by pepper spraying several people indiscriminately. They sprayed us, as my friend Paige said, quote, like we were bugs. I guess we were lucky that they didn't use tear gas against us. And, this example clearly is about pepper spray and not tear gas, but it's still this dangerous chemical being sprayed on innocent people. Mariame points out later in the zine that there's no regulation governing the use of tear gas on humans.
In the U.S.
In the U.S., which is just wild. And so we've got police out here in situations where they're engaged with their communities, these communities that they're supposed to be protecting and serving. And instead of working to de-escalate situations like the one I just shared where, the crowd is not violent, they're just there to sort of witness the situation, try to hold the police accountable, keep this black boy safe. Instead of trying to de-escalate the situation,
Get him back to his mom.
Yeah. They turn to the crowd and pepper spray them, or in some situations, they they tear gas folks. And it's just this never ending cycle of turning to the most violent means possible in order to carry out whatever they initially intended to do, which in this case, it was to arrest that black boy, to take him to jail. And, it's just so wild and despicable to me that, again, this arm of the state was armed in this way. And this is always the way it goes. Yeah.
And it's always marketed as the more humane option.
Yeah.
And then you see the photos and you're like, well, I don't know about
Not this.
In the same way that we talk about rubber bullets, and then you see rubber bullets. Whoa, I don't think that's
not
that's
that
not
either.
the thing that you said it was,
Right.
Or the way that you present it
Absolutely.
as a non-lethal thing, right? Like it's all of that. It's propaganda about what it is they're gonna do, and and trying to control situations in a humane way. So and it's not. So connected to this, there's an interesting angle that Mariame presents here that I want to talk about. She says, quote, "Tear gas has other benefits for the cops. It makes protesters appear disorganized as they flee, wail, and cry in pain, reinforcing the notion that protesters are lawless agents of chaos. As one colonial administrator observed, tear gas made protesters look silly as they panicked, ran, sobbed, and scattered. Depriving protesters of their dignity was good propaganda." So when we are panicked and deprived of our dignity, when we look like we've lost it, it's good propaganda for the state.
There it is.
This is a dangerous chemical weapon that we don't really know the long-term effects of, but we do know that it has caused death in infants and miscarriages in women. And we know that the research of it has been prevented because it is not regulated.
Yeah.
And so how do you research something that's not regulated? But an argument for its use by governments and cops is that it makes protesters look silly.
Right.
So it's this dangerous weapon that they're using purposefully to disorganize and make people look silly to get the upper hand about on the message.
Absolutely.
Because protesters look crazed. And these groups look crazed. So they must be crazed.
Yeah.
We had to do it because look at them.
Yeah.
It's like, well, they look like that because you did it.
Yes.
It's not cause and effect the way that you said it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just an infuriating argument, and I'm glad she laid it out that way because I don't know that I would have thought about it in that way.
Yeah.
As a one of the arguments from the state is that it is propaganda and it makes them look good because it makes protesters look bad. Absolutely.
I agree. I love the way that she laid this out, but it's infuriating, like you say, and really thinking about the sort of effect and the effects of tear gas. And you talked about, people panicking and running and sobbing and scattering across the place and trying to get this chemical out of their eyes and off their skin. I mean, there's so much that is just deplorable about all of it. And there's so much in this zine actually that just infuriated me, and not because of Mariame Kaba. It's just baffling that we're still in this place where tear gas is still an acceptable tool being used by the police, and especially after so many examples throughout history where we see the violence inflicted by the police on innocent people who are just engaging in their right to protest. And it's even more infuriating to see how tear gas has been determined to be this less violent alternative for police to use, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought one of the best examples that she pulled for this was what happened in the aftermath of Kent State. And we all know what took place at Kent State in 1970, but it's truly wild to me what took place after that. So Mariame says, quote, "Police brutality, often filmed or captured on camera, horrified many spectators and prompted government scrutiny, recommendations, and regulations. However, these official reactions rarely advocated for the abolition of tear gas, which was still viewed as a less lethal, more humane option. For example, following the Kent State killings in 1970, the President's Commission on Student Unrest issued a report acknowledging that the deployment of tear gas heightened tensions and resulted in National Guardsmen shooting and killing 4 students. Nonetheless, the report recommended that campus authorities continue to carry tear gas launchers because this was a safer alternative to firearms." And so it's just like, make it make sense. You acknowledge that tear gas was used, and then you acknowledge that tear gas incited chaos, and then you acknowledge that the tear gas led to the National Guard killing these innocent students. But then you turn around and say, but, well, the campus police still needs to have tear gas and needs to have tear gas launchers nonetheless. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. And, you know, especially given the fact that the tear gas still is being used.
Yeah, and if it wasn't so bad, they wouldn't wear masks.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah.
How about that? Yeah.
And I don't remember if I mentioned this on the podcast before, but I was at Kent State a couple years ago.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
For a conference, and it's really eerie and surreal to walk through where these 4 protesters were killed by U.S. soldiers because of sort of where it happened on campus. It's just this otherwise normal parking lot, and it's strange just to see it.
Yeah.
And there's no way it makes sense to me that they would say that campus police still need to stock tear gas without having seen the memorials, but even more so now that I have, and I can see where people died.
Yeah.
And I remember it. And so I don't know. It just baffles me.
Right.
It
Absolutely.
just doesn't make sense. All right. Well, let's talk about application.
Okay.
How does this apply to our daily lives and work? I think this is the perfect illustration of the imperial boomerang. This is a weapon of war developed for a battlefield that has been brought home to U.S. police departments to suppress the people who are exercising their right to speech and protest.
Yes.
This is what living in an empire is like. We are subjects, and we get called to defend the empire. We root for it. We know the songs, and we know the myths, and we cheer for the sports teams, and we cheer at the Olympics, and we count the medals, and we do all this stuff. We sing the anthem. And then when we want it to live up to its stated ideals, the empire brings home weapons and technology through people like General Amos Freeze. And it brings home that technology that's developed to suppress people around the world to suppress us.
Yes.
And this is an example of that. That's a perfect example of what the imperial boomerang is.
Absolutely. Yeah. You stand up when you're told to stand up, cheer when you're told to cheer.
Take your hat off.
Absolutely.
Cross
Be
your
respectful, you know, kiss the ring. But the moment you do something we don't like, there it is. Absolutely. I think that's great application. I think mine's kind of connected to it. For me, it's centered around our belief in abolition and how important that is and how necessary that is. And this zine for me only reinforced the need to clearly articulate and include the use of tear gas as, you know, another justification in our fight for abolition, but also another piece of what we want abolished. One of the other things we haven't talked about was Mariame cited a 2024 ACLU report in the zine that highlights that around 119,000 people have been injured by tear gas since 2015.
Yep.
So just 10 years ago, in 10 years' time, 119,000 people. And so you got to think that's not counting the likely hundreds of thousands more who were injured by tear gas in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And, you know, and all of those photographs that I mentioned before, all of those were in that time frame. And
this also is from 2024, which means that it's using data probably from 23, which means last year, this year, those numbers are not included.
And so, you know, we got to think about all the incidents that have happened since, and all the ones that haven't been able to be tracked or captured by organizations like the ACLU. And so for me, there's just simply too much hazard and harm and violence that tear gas inflicts to consider it something that should even exist, let alone be used in this way. Yep. And so that's my application. Like, we've got to get rid of tear gas. It's got to be abolished like other elements of the criminal punishment and violence system that it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed. All right, let's talk about homework.
Okay.
What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work beyond our conversation today? So there's a Senate bill that was proposed in 2020 by Bernie Sanders that would have prohibited federal cops from using tear gas and would have incentivized states and local governments to prohibit it as well.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, this didn't go too far because we would be talking about this differently.
Yes.
But I want to check it out maybe read more of the language in it and also see where it stalled out. Like,
yes.
what happened to it, and who are the people who said, nah,
not
did
that.
it stall out in committee? What was the hang up about it? So that's my homework. I just want to learn a little bit more about that.
like
Bill,
that.
what about you?
Yeah. My homework is to check out the other zines that make up this archival activation series, which I had no idea existed. As you mentioned at the top, this zine is a part of it.
Yep.
And so I kind of want to check out the rest of them. So I did a little bit of digging. The zines in her archival activation series analyze history and documents related to criminal justice issues and violence and social movements, and have this particular focus on prison abolition. And so some of the other zines include, quote, the Ohio Penitentiary Fire of 1930, the Philadelphia Story, another experiment on women, and Reverse Freedom Riders, just to name a few. So I just want to check out the rest of these because this one was great. I learned a lot from it. Yeah. So I'd imagine there's some good learning from the others, and maybe we'll talk about them in a future episode.
I'm sure.
Yeah,
sounds good.
Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing those titles. I hadn't looked them up either.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good stuff. And Damien, you are up next time. What do you bring to the table in our next episode?
Yeah. So I thought about it today, and I was like, it's been a minute since we engaged with this docuseries, and so I thought it was time for us to get back to it. So I'm bringing the third episode of the docuseries Eyes on the Prize 3 to the table for us to talk about next week. The third episode is titled Million Man March. And the description is, quote, a look at the controversy and community inspired by the 1995 Million Man March in Washington, D.C., which came to be a transformative experience for many of the people who traveled from around the nation to participate. So, yeah, I'm excited to continue to watch this great docuseries and talk about this particular episode with you next time.
Yeah, me too. I've been looking forward to getting back to that. So,
yes.
Nice work bringing it back around.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. We'll talk to you next week.
You know, I haven't said that part in a while either.
Oh, way to go. Good job.